So I'm going to get into my talk on vaping. The very first question I was asked back in August of 2017 was, is vaping safe or not? And it's a very hard question to answer. Is it good or is it bad? Just so you know, the government refers to it as Electronic Nicotine Delivery System, ENDS. I think it's a very interesting acronym, obviously. The ends of your life, perhaps. So there's a lot of media, there's a lot of marketing, there's a lot of imagery that goes along with it. This one is interesting. Vaping is not cigarette smoking, it's not poison, it's not conjoined twins at the cheek. It's not a guy from Mad Men who came home and he's waiting for a martini. And then you look at this picture and you say, oh wow, if there was a version of this with no cancer risk, wouldn't you switch? We did, thank you. I mean, it's very powerful imagery. And then you switch over to this one. We got somebody with a toe tag and it says it's the next generation cigarette for the next generation addict. I like this slide because it's a little bit of foreshadowing for my talk. So what is the information? Is vaping safe or not? Back in 2015, England released from their Public Health England review of all the literature, and back in 2015, they said that vaping is 95% safer than smoking. And once everybody heard that it was 95% safer than smoking, that was it. It's safe, it's no big deal, yay, let's all go vape. Of course, later on that year, the British Medical Journal exposed that there was undisclosed links between some of the authors of the study and big tobacco. And then just to juxtapose it, you could see the centers or CDC, and you see their website, and look at how fearful it is. E-cigarettes in youth, a public health concern. So what is the evidence? I started doing this talk last year, and I had to build up my point. And luckily, the United States government gave me all this information, and now I could just present it to you. So back in January 23rd of this year, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released their review of over 800 peer-reviewed articles, and this is what they have to say about the safety of e-cigarette use. That e-cigarettes are not without health risks, they are likely to be far less harmful. I really love the word likely, just like when you're driving 70 miles per hour and you get into a car accident, you're likely to not die. That word is there on purpose because they want you to feel a little bit more comfortable with what's going on with vaping. There are fewer numbers and lower levels of toxic substances in the vapes than the conventional cigarettes, and that's absolutely true, which is where you then think that this is a level of harm reduction. However, their long-term health effects are not yet clear, and that's the most important point. So it's 2018, and we do not know. And again, this was released in January of 2018. The thing that is particularly important to me, and what I do when I'm going around to all these towns and talking, is about the youth. So the youth who use e-cigarettes at a higher rate than adults do, there is substantial evidence that e-cigarettes use increases the risk of transitioning to smoking conventional cigarettes. And that's a big problem. So what's the level of evidence? Conclusive and substantial, the only ones I pay attention to. The rest of it's just a coin flip. As far as exposure to nicotine, there's nicotine in all these products, so yes, you're exposed to nicotine. There's conclusive and substantial evidence that you're exposed to toxic substances. And again, there's less of them in the vapes than there are in regular cigarettes, but yes, they are in the vapes. Of course, there's substantial evidence about dependence because there's nicotine in it, which is a very addictive substance we'll get into. As far as harm reduction is concerned, they're saying because there's less of these toxic substances in these vapes, then they're less harmful than cigarettes. As far as youth, again, there's substantial evidence. It's not just a moderate amount. It's substantial evidence that youth who vape have an increased risk of going on to smoking later on. There's also conclusive evidence that there's secondhand exposure. As far as cancer is concerned, which everyone wants to know about, there is no available evidence whether or not there's e-cigarette use as associated with intermediate endpoints, cancer endpoints. So the bottom line is we just don't know. As far as injuries and poisonings, I'll get into them later on, but little kids who drink the vape e-juice bottles, they drink them down, they go in the emergency room with tachyarrhythmias. So now that you guys know all the information that there is, and there's a handout, and you guys can have this and bring it home, you don't have to memorize it, you don't have to take pictures of it, you can kind of chew up the data. We're done talking, right? You guys had lunch, we're out of the room, we just found 45 minutes of our day that we can go do some stuff with, right? How awesome is that? So why are we still talking? And the answer is because I like to I like to reframe the question. I'm not really worried about whether or not vaping is safe or not. We're not going to know for about 10 to 20 years. That's clearly obvious, right? So I like to talk about something a little bit different, and I take the same topic and I reframe it. So what's my reframe? Nicotine. You guys all in this room know about nicotine. It's a neurochemical transmitter. We all have it in our nervous system. I think I want to do this with my fingers. I have a thought. There's electricity. Chemical goes across a synapse. Anyway, nicotine is in all of us, whether or not we smoke or not. It's also in the tobacco leaf. When you take a puff of a cigarette or a vape, nicotine gets up into your brain in about 7 seconds or so. It affects the nucleus accumbens in a couple areas of the brain. Long story short, it causes a release of dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical that causes you to feel pleasure and calm. Just so you know, 80% of young people who try 2 cigarettes or more go on to battle a lifetime of addiction. So why is it so hard to quit? You get on this merry-go-round. So you take a puff of a vape or a cigarette and your nicotine levels go up, so then your dopamine levels go up, and then in between vapes, your nicotine levels come down, so your dopamine levels come down, and then you start to feel unsettled. And although you don't know it and it's not a conscious thought on your part, your brain says, wait a second, I'm not happy about how I'm doing, I'm not happy about how I feel, I got to get back to that happy place. So it makes you go get nicotine, and then you can spike up your dopamine levels, and you go around and around in a circle. But that's not the end of the story about nicotine and how insidious it is. This is a slide from 1988. The x-axis is time, the y-axis is the basal percent release of dopamine when you do a certain drug. So if we look at cocaine in the top right, when you take a hit of cocaine, it's a fairly straight up line. It's a very strong release of dopamine. And then it starts to soften off and round out, and then it takes about an hour and a half before you get your highest dopamine release from cocaine. Morphine, whoever invented it, purposefully rounded the dose effect so that you wouldn't get such a strong dopamine release so that you wouldn't become addicted. And we could see it here. And it takes almost 2 hours before you get to your highest dopamine release. And again, this top line is a crazy dose, 10 milligrams per kilogram. I've never given that to anyone in my entire life. And that's a rounded dose. So let's take a look at nicotine. It's almost a straight line up. And it's about 10 to 15 minutes. So you take a hit of a cigarette and bang, you get a straight up shot of dopamine, and then as soon as you're done with your nicotine, it falls straight down. It doesn't slowly come off. So this is a highly addictive substance. The only thing that's addictive is, of course, amphetamines like crystal meth, etc. And you can see, of course, it's crazy numbers. It gets up into 1,000. But this is not where the story ends, right? So people who smoke a pack a day, there's 20 cigarettes in a pack. Researchers have studied how often they're taking hits off a cigarette. It's between 10 and 20 puffs of a cigarette, depending on what kind of mood you're in. Whether you're at work, you're hanging out and having a drink with friends, etc. So you're like that mouse in that commercial, hitting that pleasure button in your brain. Right? If there's 10 to 20 times per cigarette and 20 cigarettes in a pack, 200 to 400 times a day, you're trying to release that dopamine in your brain over and over again. And you do that for 30 years. You create new neural pathways, new feedback mechanisms, and they become almost impossible to break. And let's be honest, no one who does 200 to 400 hits of cocaine or morphine or whatever, they're going to be dead in about a half an hour. So this goes on and on and on. This is clearly the most addictive substance known to mankind. This is way more addictive than cocaine or heroin, which, is consistent with what I heard when I used to take care of patients in the Bronx who were addicted to cocaine and heroin and had gotten off of it, and they said they just can't get off of cigarettes. So now we're going to move from nicotine addiction in general to nicotine and the adolescent brain. This is a picture of my son, Jake. And let's learn about what nicotine does to the adolescent brain. It affects the prefrontal cortex. So the boxed out area over here, red and orange, is least developed. Blue and dark purple are most developed. It takes till you're 25 years old for that area of your brain to develop. So this area of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, it governs judgment and decision making. It's executive function. This is why adolescents do things that they would never do later on in life. And in adolescent medicine, having nothing to do with nicotine addiction, we all know that this is the reason, this is the part of the brain that causes these problems. It's interesting to me that at about 25 to 27 years old, which is when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, is right around the time that your children come home and they say to you, "Mom, Dad, you were right. All along, I don't know why I never listened to you. You're so smart. It all makes sense to me now." The reason why is because this is the area of the brain. It takes that long. Unfortunately, it's also the area of the brain that, in addition to participating in risk-taking behavior, is particularly vulnerable to drug abuse. These are some of the studies that researched what happens to the brain. So while that brain is developing and they're getting nicotine, it disrupts the growth of brain circuits, it controls attention, learning, and susceptibility to addiction. So there is significant increased risk of psychiatric disorders, cognitive impairment, and attention deficit when you are using nicotine at that time. So let's be clear, it's a perfect storm. The most addictive substance known to mankind at a time in a child's life when they're most prone to risk-taking behavior, affecting the area of their brain that is most likely to go on to lead them to a lifetime of addiction. Could not be worse. So why is it so hard to talk about vaping? So it's very easy to talk about cigarettes. I show this to my smoking patients, and I say, "Hey, look at this cartoon. Do you want to drink methanol, arsenic, carbon monoxide, paint?" Nobody wants to do it. There's 7,000 chemicals in the cigarette. There's about 80 harmful carcinogens in the cigarette. It's a very easy conversation to have. It's not so easy to have this conversation about vaping because the literature is all over the place and we don't know. We just reviewed the literature and it is clear that we don't know how dangerous vaping is yet. So here's the 42 chemicals that we're aware of so far that are in vapes. The one with check marks are harmful. The ones that are red are in secondhand vape. Just so you know, there are certain things called flavorants. Flavorants are the chemicals that give you the flavor. Back in the 70s when we invented microwave popcorn, people who were working in the factory were around diacetyl and acetylpropanol, and they inhaled it and they wound up getting bronchiolitis obliterans, which then people call popcorn lung. It's not because it looks like popcorn in their lungs. And then when people who are pro-vaping say, "Well, all these chemicals are in our vapes, don't worry, it's safe because the FDA says that it's safe for food consumption," I always make the argument that the pH in our stomach is not the same as our pH in our lungs, so maybe it's safe for us to eat it, but it's not safe for us to actually be inhaling it. Two other chemicals, propylene glycol and glycerin, break down to formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, and they are known to be carcinogenic, and they are in the vapes. So this study came out in March of 2018, and again, I will point out that the National Academy study came out in January of 2018, and they reviewed literature for a year before they released that study. This is a scattergram of these guys drawing blood from adolescents, and they were looking for these unpronounceable chemicals on the left side. The left box is a non-smoker, non-vapor, the middle box is just a vapor, and the right box is a smoker or a smoker and a vapor. And what we can see from this study is that vapors have these unpronounceable chemicals in their bloodstream at a higher level than non-vapors, non-smokers. Why is this important? Because you could make the argument, well, these chemicals are around because they're near traffic or they're playing in the street or other people around, and the answer is no. The chemicals are there. Of course, as you see, not to the same level as cigarettes, which kind of supports what we learned earlier, which although there's toxic chemicals in there, there's just less of them. What was their conclusion? These findings can be used to challenge the idea that e-cigarette vapor is safe. This was not in the National Academy's review. So then I have all these other studies I'm not going to go into that prove that e-cigarette use in youth leads to cigarette smoking. It's there. The data is very conclusive about it. This one I like to talk about. This was done in Connecticut. It was released in December 2017. They looked at kids 2013-14 and then 14-15, and they asked them a very simple question. Do you smoke, do you vape, or do you do nothing? And then they came back the next year and they asked them, do you smoke, do you vape, or do you do nothing? And it was a crossover study to see what happens. And what they learned is that e-cigarette use in youth was associated with future cigarette use, but cigarette use, conventional cigarette use, was not associated with future e-cigarette use. So at least in our adolescence, this is a one-way street. I really liked their discussion because at the time, they put into words what I had been saying at all these talks. You know how you know somebody's really smart when they say something that you already know or believe, and you're like, wow, that guy's really smart, because I agree with them, and they're smart, therefore they're right? And then, God forbid, you actually see somebody write it on a piece of paper and it gets published. You feel great about yourself because they're so smart. So they were saying what I'd been saying up until that time, which is that the rising frequency of recent e-cigarette use amongst youth over time is especially concerning, especially in light of that fact or the evidence that e-cigarette use is a significant risk factor for future conventional cigarette use. So clearly this is a significant problem. Back in December 2017, the NIH released their yearly study of our kids. That's done by University of Michigan. I had no idea that they do this, but every year they research our adolescents' behavior with regards to sex, alcohol, drugs, and tobacco use. This was the first year that rather than ask, do you vape, they actually asked them, what do you vape? And they broke it down into categories. So we don't have any earlier data. This is the first year's worth of this data. And of course, it's a little surprising. So 13% of our 8th graders are vaping, 24% of our 10th graders are vaping, and almost 28% of our 12th graders are vaping. And you can see that as they get older, their nicotine use goes up, their just flavoring goes down. Interestingly, their marijuana or THC use stays flat. And showing that these people put the study together, know what they're talking about, they also ask, don't know. I propose that a lot of the kids who are vaping don't really know what's in the vape. An older kid says, here, try this, and the younger kid says, what's in it, and the older kid says whatever they're going to say. They don't really know what's in that vape. The other thing I would say is that this data is probably incorrect. So I've been doing this for over a year now. Every time I'm near a high school kid, I ask them a very simple question. I say, how many kids do you think in your school are vaping? And I used to get the answer of about 50%. In the last 4 months or so, I get most, or 70% or 90%. Now, I don't think kids are really capable of figuring out exactly how many kids are smoking. I don't think their brains work it that way. But I'm telling you, it's greater than 50%. So more than half of our kids in the United States of America are now vaping nicotine. So why are they doing it? This study came, this is from the FDA website, 2013 and 2014. 81% of the students who said that they were vaping did it because of the appealing flavors. Here's some of the appealing flavors. As you can see, there's something called e-juice. They come in these little bottles. They're delicious. You know, Rice Krispies, Cocoa Puffs, whatever they are. So these little bottles get left around by the older uncle who's visiting, and then the toddler goes over, sees it, picks it up, and it's just like any other candy. They open it up and they drink, and then they're in the emergency room. Here's some of the other e-liquid flavors. So this is a store, so vape stores can make their own e-juice, and they put these interesting flavors, and they could also sell you the different nicotine strengths. I was told at a recent talk, although I have not pulled up the study yet, that the FDA sampled some of these places that said there was 0 milligrams of nicotine, and they found nicotine in them. I can't imagine there's no nicotine. It's probably not like they have a whole separate system like kosher for no nicotine versus nicotine. So I'm sure there's nicotine in them, and who the hell knows, and who's checking to see if they're telling you the truth. This one was so good, I got so hungry when I found this. I said, this is not a vape shop. I'm like, oh, this is a mistake. Google made a mistake. This is not a vape shop. And I said, no, wait, it is. And this is the picture of the bottles and the candy that you could get. So let me ask you a question. Is this geared to the 50-year-old who's been smoking a pack a day for 30 years who wants to get off vapes? Or is this geared towards the 15-year-old who they're trying to get into the nicotine addiction industry? So what are our kids using? Our kids are using the Juul. The Juul is the iPhone of vaping at this point in time. As a matter of fact, it's turned into its own verb. It's now referred to as juuling. So juuling and vaping and e-cigarettes and vape pens and all this other stuff, they're all the same thing. Juul is what your kids are using. So according to Juul, this comes from their webpage. This is a pod, and I'm going to get into it, and I'll show you, and I'll pass around some of the devices. Each one of these pods is the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes. And are you going to make any Juuls with any non-nicotine juice at this time? All our Juul pods have nicotine. Of course they're going to keep nicotine in it. That's how they're going to stay in business. So again, this comes from their website. No tobacco or e-liquid product should ever be considered safe. Inhalation can aggravate existing respiratory conditions. If you do not currently use nicotine-containing products, we recommend that you do not start. And then, of course, there's a lot of problems with the batteries. Sometimes the batteries are very faulty, the amperage, and there's all kinds of problems with it. This came from a pro vaping blog, and I really like them. They have a soul, so their safety tips. The very first one is if you don't already smoke, do not start vaping now. Eliminate nicotine from your e-liquids, prefer child-proof bottles, and take precautionary measures to ensure battery safety. Here's my obligatory disgusting picture of somebody whose face got burnt from a battery that exploded. And just last month, we had our first death from vaping. So this gentleman's battery exploded, he had metal shards go through his brain, and he also had 80% burns. So he's our first vaping death that we're aware of. We also have our first disease related to vaping directly. So this was a teenager who got hypersensitivity pneumonitis after vaping for only about 3 weeks, and she had ARDS and was on the blower for a couple of weeks and got better. So again, this is from May, and the National Academy study was from January. So what's my opinion? My opinion is I don't want to have a conversation about whether or not vaping is safe or not. The answer is we really don't know. Part of the problem is when you say vaping is safer than cigarettes, everybody likes to take the word safer and run with it. Safer does not mean safe, it's just less dangerous than something else. So people like to hold on to that word and run with it. So I don't want to have that conversation. I want to have a conversation about whether or not our kids should ever be vaping. And the answer is no. There's absolutely no acceptable reason why any youth is vaping for any reason whatsoever. I think that vapes are possibly or probably a good tool to help people get off of cigarettes. Just as a side note, I don't think it's all evil. The literature is very ambiguous about it. There's good studies and bad studies about whether or not vaping is a good tool to help get people off of cigarettes. The bottom line is that anyone who's addicted to cigarettes should go through a smoking cessation program, use the tried and true medications that we have now that are terrible and haven't been new in about 20 or 30 years, and do acupuncture and hypnosis and do whatever else that you want to do. If you cannot get off of cigarettes and you failed everything else, would I want you as an adult to vape over smoking cigarettes? Absolutely. Not because I think vaping is safe, but because I believe that there's less chemicals in the vapes, and therefore I'd rather you have less chemicals than no chemicals. That's not this conversation. This conversation is the 15-year-old should not be vaping for any reason whatsoever. I believe that there's a significant amount of money that's being made to turn your kid into a nicotine addict. And let's be clear, it's a $5 billion industry in 2018, not cigarettes, just vaping, $5 billion. It's predicted to be $10 billion by 2021. Big Tobacco is in it, but they're playing catch up with all the mom and pop shops in places like Juul. And these flavored vaping liquids are a gross and obvious gateway product that's aimed at our kids to enter into the nicotine addiction marketplace. And that's what this is about. My concern is that the ever-increasing vape use by our youth and that vaping leads to cigarette use is going to have catastrophic health issues in about 20 to 30 years, and I am happy because I do not plan to be practicing medicine at that time. I do not want to be around for all the people who are going to be getting lung cancer and emphysema and heart attacks and strokes. They're going to happen. I did not poll the literature myself, but the latest one that I heard about that is that your chances of going on to become a conventional smoker if you're an adolescent is 2 to 7 times more likely to become a smoker if you're a vapor. So let's be clear. If your kid's vaping, it's not they're going to turn into an evil person. They're not going to turn into a pack-a-day Marlboro smoker. But their chances are about 2 to 7 times more likely. So what can you do? So I teach the parents about educating themselves, having open and honest conversation with their kids. I advocate the 10-minute car ride. I picked this up from somebody else in one of my talks. The 10-minute car ride works very well because you're not having eye-to-eye contact, so they're less concerned and less embarrassed. If you go into your kid's room right before bedtime and you sit down and say, hey, little Jimmy, I heard you're vaping and let's talk about it. No way, you're getting nowhere. And the best part about a 10-minute conversation in the car is that the car ride ends. You're getting out of the car and you're going in the supermarket and they know that you don't want to talk about vaping in the supermarket either. So there's a beginning and an end and it's a small little time and then you have multiple ones of these conversations. So very briefly, what is an electronic cigarette? So there's 3 parts to it. There's a battery, a vaporizer, some kind of heater element, whether or not it's atomizer or vaporizer. It heats up a liquid element, and then the mouthpiece. So I have some of them to pass around, which I will in a second, but essentially they all come in these 3 different pieces. They all look very different. You can customize them, which the kids are very big into. These two are e-cigs because they look like cigarettes. These are vape pens because they look like pens. Kids have the pens in their hands and they will take a hit when the teacher is turned around and they just keep on going. So they can vape all day long. These are also kind of a vape pen, and these are called mods because you can modify them or change their characteristics, and then they can kind of look like anything. These are some more heavy-duty mods, and you can see that, at least in the adult world, people get really into this. Clearly, there's engineers involved. There's a lot of videos how to upgrade your system, how to change the way the smoke goes. They have contests, etc., etc. But our kids are using this. So a vapor, a Juul starter pack, which is this, goes anywhere from $40 to $80, depending on where you're buying it, what anybody tells me, and whether or not you're buying it secondhand. So I'm going to start passing them around so you guys can touch them and feel them, because it's very important. It comes with a piece that charges it, and then this piece just goes on top, clicks in, and the kids put this into their computer, and it's sitting there in school, and they're charging their Juul. And then there's the pod. So this would be a typical pod, and it goes in the top. You take it out, and then the lingo is you take a rip. So you could take a rip. The girls just take it, and they put it right into their bra strap when the teacher turns around, or boys are putting it right into their waistbands or whatever. These Juul pods, they go for, when you buy these, they're $20 for 4, so it's the equivalent of $5 a pack of cigarettes rather than the $15 a pack of cigarettes that things are going on for now. So I think it's important that everybody touches these things, plays with them, passes them around. Can you do me a favor, Cora? Can you hand these to other people? This is one that's more used, it can be used for vaping, but more for probably THC. You can take off the top and you can put your THC liquid in there, and then you just hold the button down and then you let it rip. This is a competitor to Juul. This is called a Fix. It's more or less the same thing. It's just diamond shaped instead of rectangular shaped. And kids like it because there's more e-juice that comes along with it. Here, Ben, can you do me a favor? Just pass the stuff around. I would really appreciate it if all of it comes back to me. You could try. This one is meant straight for THC and marijuana use. You're going to see, and I'll show you my presentation in a second. So the charging, I find, this is just me, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've noticed that the ones that are used for THC tend to screw in for their charging instead. And then it comes with a little piece that you can take off the marijuana concentrate and then put it into the thing for the heating element. So I'll also pass this around, and you guys can play with it as well. So here we saw this. These guys are modding. So after you're done using your e-juice, rather than go buy some more, you can buy big ones in the vape, and then there's YouTube videos on how to crack it open and get your juice back in there and keep it going. This one is kind of more advanced. It's very big in New Jersey. Doesn't seem to be popping in Westchester, where it comes with a bigger tank, and you just pop it in and then you go with a better battery life on it. Obviously, it's a bigger device. What I really like about this one is that you can color coordinate it with your outfit. So what we can move on to now is to THC and concentrates. So Pissing Excellence is one of the ones that seem to be very popular around. They come in different flavors: strawberry, banana, pineapple, gelato, clementine. There's a lot that goes around to THC and vaping the THC. There's a lot of lingo that I don't really know. So when I'm trying to teach the parents, I can only go so far. What they do is they take THC, they take leaf, and then they concentrate it, doing whatever they want to do. Usually they use butane if it's being done in a mom and pop shop, but if it's being done in a very official place, like in states where they actually can sell it legally, it's probably being done in a better and safer way. So we have to be careful about where kids are getting their THC from. So I know this slide doesn't really show up very well, but the reason why we call them concentrates is because back in our day, when we were doing stupid things, marijuana leaf had about 5 to 15% THC. Nowadays, marijuana leaf is about 10 to 20% THC. The concentrates are 40 to 80% THC. So they come in all different types of ways that it looks. This looks like honey batter or something like that. There's all different kinds of words for it. Oil is one of the key words because it's an oil version of THC. So when you spell oil upside down, it becomes the numbers 710. So July 10th is now the new April 20th THC Get Stoned Day. So now there's 2 of them, so you should be aware of it. For those of you who don't know, 420 is also April 20th is National Get Stoned Day. I've been told misinformation. I thought it had to do with the police that call THC 420, but not. Some people believe. I don't really know, honestly, the behind of it, but April 20th is a Get Stoned Day. Now July 10th is a Get Stoned Day. What you guys need to know is that the levels of THC in here are so strong that the kids sometimes can't really handle it. They sometimes pass out. It has its own word. It's called greening out. And we have had kids in the community green out in the classroom. And we have had kids come through our emergency room with loss of consciousness or seizures, et cetera, from too much THC, and they're not able to handle it. Marijuana affects the adolescent brain. It decreases the IQ, lowers satisfaction scores, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same kind of thing. Developing brain should not be exposed to THC. So these are what some of them look like, just so that we have an idea of what we're looking at. Here from California, you can see it's solvent-free, right? They want to be very health conscious, so they're getting stoned, which is fine. They have 85% THC and there's no solvents. These guys, although their marketing is terrible, it doesn't really look very attractive, but they say no glycol or glycerin, propylethylene glycol. If you remember, those were the chemicals that go on to become carcinogenic. So everybody knows what the bad chemicals are and everybody's trying to avoid them. This just looks like a cigarette. It's got 200 hits and then you're done and you can throw it out. This one is discreet, so it's probably more famous for not having too much of an odor, so you can kind of get stoned near other people and they won't even know that you're getting stoned. So Pissing Excellence is doing a great job, 92% THC, 92%. So they have a menu of different ways that you can get it. So these are push applicators so that you just buy the syringe that has the THC liquid so you can kind of fill up your stuff. There's shatter, nectar, turp butter, sugar batter, crumble, and sauce. It's basically different viscosity of this concentrated THC. Just so you guys know, and you might want to pass it around to people who you know who are using these products. This I found out from a Westchester police officer on the Drug Enforcement Task Force who did one of these talks with me, and I did not know this. In New York State, if you're found with marijuana that's less than an ounce, it's a misdemeanor, i.e. you get a ticket. And if you are found with greater than an ounce, or more importantly, any of these products, any concentrates, even if you legally acquired them somewhere else, it is a felony, which is handcuffs into jail, and then lawyers to get you out of jail, and then fighting the system, and then hoping that it doesn't get on your college record. So if you walk into your kid's room and you find these syringes, you're hoping that it's THC, right? Because you want it to not be heroin. Here they'll show you that this is cannabis sativa, or different forms, etc., and what it looks like in different kind of colors. So then when I'm working with the parents, I move on and I start to talk to them about the handout, which I think some of you have here, about how to talk to their kids. This is one of the rare instances of government information that I find useful. And it tells and helps parents talk to their children about vaping. And what I really like about it is it has a lot of the questions they may ask you, and then some of the answers that you can provide. Most important, I talk to them about using a technique called Ask, Don't Tell, which is when you are trying to institute change, when you're trying to get someone to have a behavioral change, especially somebody who's already addicted, sitting down and just yelling at them and saying, you shouldn't do this, blah, 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 you're not getting anywhere. You need to have a conversation, they have to understand what's going on, and they have to be part of the discussion. And so using a technique saying, tell me what you know about vaping, or tell me about the kids who are vaping, or tell me why do you vape, or what does it make you feel like, and having that conversation moves the bar to a degree. There's a nice article out of the Times from February about how to talk with your teenagers. And I'll not go through it, but there's a whole bunch of them, including ask why before suggesting why not, sound familiar, and conceding the limits of your power and having good conversations with your kids. Again, all the New York Times articles always have a Juul in their picture, and the reason why is because at least in New York, if not most of the country, Juul is the #1 vape for our kids, and it's just a device that they can't resist. So I also go into what they can do to work with their legislators. Some of the information I got from Maureen Kenny has been excellent, very helpful in doing all this. Just so you guys know, New York State did not even ban vaping in public until October of last year. So we're not even a year into this. Before it became prohibited, it's now considered the same thing as any other tobacco product. There's a lot of other legislation that was out there. So liquid nicotine sales is 21 in New York and Albany. You guys should be happy to know that just on I think June 5th or June 6th, Westchester just passed new legislation that you now have to be 21 years old to buy any liquid nicotine in Westchester County. And other policy solutions I go over with them. This came from a convenience store in somewhere in Westchester. This is an ice cream bin, and these are vape products right in front of the kids. There's no law that says that it has to be put behind the counter like other cigarettes. It's not legislated yet. So you should know and be glad that that on June 5th we're now 21 years old in Westchester, although it won't go into effect for at least another month or so. And another really major legislative thing hit literally the next day, June 6th, in San Francisco. So the year before, San Francisco banned the sale of flavored nicotine in the city. And not just the vape stuff, but even menthol. And that's a huge thing. So of course, Big Tobacco got into it to fight it. And R.J. Reynolds popped $12 million into it. And the people who were fighting to keep it alive only popped about $2.5 million or $3 million. More than half of it came from Michael Bloomberg personally, and they defeated the attempt to remove that law by 68% to 32%. So this is huge because all the rest of the cities are going to say, well, if it won in San Francisco, then we could take a whack at it, no matter how much big business or big tobacco is going to pop into the money. The other reason why this is huge is because of menthol. Just for those of you who don't know about menthol and the history of menthol, in the 50s and 60s, the tobacco companies realized that they weren't making enough of a profit in the poorer neighborhoods. So lower socioeconomic status neighborhoods, not enough money. So they realized that if they put menthol into the cigarettes, which cools down the throat, people can take a bigger hit and get a bigger bolus or dose of nicotine and therefore become more addicted. And then they threw barbecues and parties with Cools and Newports and threw them out to everybody for free. All my patients in the Bronx were all menthol cigarette smokers because everybody handed it out to them for free. And that was done on purpose. So now they won't be able to buy menthol in San Francisco, which is going to be huge. The other interesting thing you guys should know is that Juul was created and is made and manufactured in San Francisco by a venture capital company that's doing very well. It was a couple of guys out of Stanford who wanted to be able to vape and didn't like what's out there and put out a pretty decent product. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Here's a map of our local vape stores from where we are. We're standing in that star right there, and those are the nearest vape shops to go to. And then I realized that Juuls, which is what the kids usually use, they're sold in many other places. They're sold in gas stations and everywhere else. So I usually go to the Juul website and I put in the address and I say, hey, where can I get my nearest Juul? And then it kind of pops up. So where the star and the little blue circles are where you could buy Juuls nearby. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys saw the New Yorker article from April about vaping, which was kind of on both sides of the pro and con of vaping. It was a very well done article. There was a little bit of a pro-Juul part to it. And Juul said that they know that kids are using their product. And at least in the article, they said they don't want kids to be using their Juul product. They want it for adults. So since I started doing this talk, these new pop-ups came up. I never saw them before. They want everyone to know that Juul feels that this is a product just for adults and it should be used to help you get off of cigarettes, and it's not really meant for kids. And even though it may be 18 years old to purchase other places. They upped their age to 21 years old if you're going to be buying it online. Thank you.